Welcome to the definitive guide to creative testing with Facebook ads. We're going to dive into the most popular methodologies and why some of them are really popular and why they're probably not really good for you, why people really love to use them and what you should be doing instead. We're going to dive into the tools that you can be using right now to make sure that you see less stress and more success with more stability and confidence with your Facebook ads while making the work a lot easier and the step-by-step methodology to get that done. And we're going to deep dive into how Facebook uses data, plus how ads do the targeting so that you never have to play the game again of interest groups and lookalikes and retargeting, because the honest truth is you shouldn't have been doing that starting in 2018, and you definitely don't need to do it now, especially if scale, growth, confidence, success is your goal. With that being said, let's get started. One thing, I just want to say thank you very much. I know you could be anywhere on the internet right now and you've chosen to be here. If you want more help, please subscribe, hit the bell, and go to links.facebookdisruptor.com so I can be of more help to you. Let's get started. So, first thing, the most popular methodology people are using right now to test their creative on Facebook is using ABO, ad set budget optimization, and small budgets to test individually built out ads over a set period of time. Now, this makes sense because you're saying, well, I'm letting every ad get a fair shot. And this makes sense because you're saying, well, I'm only going to risk a little bit, and if it works well, I'm going to increase my budget, or I'm going to take it from my test campaign and put it into my scaling campaign. Logically, that makes sense on paper. However, when we break down what we're actually doing, we can see why this is a massive liability to your future. And don't worry, we're going to get into what you should be doing instead really quick. So, to look at it in a different way, what you're actually doing is saying, I'm going to predict exactly what Facebook users want to see. I'm going to invest a small amount of money so I get a little bit of data to see what's working well initially, what gets lucky early. And I'm going to make sure to invest as much or more in bad ideas as I do in good ones. Because let's be honest, if you test 10, 20, 30, 50, 100 ads, odds are the vast majority of them are bad ideas. So if you're only spending 20% of that testing budget on a good idea, how much money are you actually spending on ads that are not only bad performance-wise, but actually also raising your CPMs and reducing your estimated action rate as an advertiser that ultimately hurts your ability to grow everything else that's already working? Because yes, all of that is related. Facebook is evaluating how you behave and your relationship within the platform and how they view you as a business partner to ultimately monetize the attention that you provide on the platform. Facebook gives you the option of getting impressions. They sell you users' eyeballs for profit. Your responsibility is to make sure that that is not a liability to their bottom line and not forcing people to have a bad experience or want to leave Facebook. So when you build out, say, 10 ads and you launch them over the course of a week with, let's say, a small budget, and you're measuring for click-through rate and CPC and all this other stuff, what you're doing is spending probably 80, 90% of your budget on ads that aren't good to begin with. And you're telling Facebook that a bad idea that is a liability to their business model is as important or more important to you than actually making an ad that's any good. Plus, what we do from the next step, oh, if it's working, we're going to raise the budget, we're going to turn off bad ads. You're saying if something gets lucky on a few data points, if it gets 5 sales over the course of a week or 10 sales, or if it does a little bit better, then we're going to spend all of our money there. Now, the honest truth is 2 or 3 is not a good data set. When we're running our testing, we have to understand that we need high confidence in our assets. And the biggest liability here is ultimately that the ads that win in testing when we're using ABO and we're trying to get retargeting ads and prospecting ads, and we're running against different audiences and we're doing all of these different variables. When you spread your dollars so thin that you get very little data on a whole lot of options, what you're basically doing is saying, I am not willing to invest in the development of good ideas that I have confidence in. I'm throwing as much stuff against the wall to see what gets lucky. And then ultimately, can I bet the future of my business on investing as much as possible in what I got lucky early on? You're basically playing a volume game with lottery tickets and trying to put your thumb on the scale. Now, you can be successful doing that. There is a version of success where a C+ or a B- is good for you. My suggestion to you, though, is don't define success as, well, I'm doing good enough, because honestly, you deserve a lot better than that. And as you continue to test and your CPMs continue to rise and your costs on Facebook continues to grow because you're investing more and more money in ads that aren't good, so you're becoming a larger and larger liability to Facebook and their business model, and they see you as a worse and worse business partner. The only way to overcome that when you follow down that strategy and that path is to make more ads and to test faster. And so you're ultimately testing 10, 20, 30, 40 ads, potentially against different audiences or different landing pages, all spreading those dollars even thinner. So you're getting even lower confidence across even greater amount of variables. Now, the honest truth is that is an unsustainable path, because either you're going to continue to be able to increase your budget, or you're going to have to make more content to take more and more lottery tickets to hopefully be able to pay off. Now, the problem here is, while you can stay ahead of the curve, eventually you're going to run out of time in the day, creatives that you can test, or money that you can invest. It's not a sustainable solution. And while you're doing that, you're also creating a situation where Facebook sees you as a less and less desirable business partner. Plus, you are betting more and more of your business's future on unproven assets that have never been actually able to deliver you a projectable result. Now, no matter who you are, when we're running a test, if we can't predict the outcome, if the outcome isn't predictable, then that test isn't finished. If you get something with 2 sales and something with 5 sales, or the CTRs here is good, or the first time impression rate of this one, whatever, none of those things say, I know week in, week out that this is going to come in at a CPA of X. If you can't say with extreme confidence what the output of that test is going to be, then that test isn't finished. And ultimately, if you're investing $50 on a few ads here and $20 on a few ads there, and you're repeating that process over and over again, you don't have anything at the end of that that says, I know how much this ad is going to run. You, in fact, are creating a system that is wildly unstable, where your costs are going to rise every single week, every single month. Now, how many of you, show of hands, have been seeing a situation where Facebook gets more and more expensive, where it's less and less stable, where you have less and less confidence, and trying to solve problems with audiences instead of creative testing properly? Now, you might think that you're doing the right thing, but each time you apply the solution, the problem gets a little bit worse. And that's because you're putting in a little Band-Aid that ultimately doesn't fix the institutional problem that you're bringing into the system. So to recap on all of this, if you are running creative testing by building out individual posts in an ABO campaign, we're putting in daily budgets and then increasing them on things that work and turning off ads that don't, and moving from a testing campaign to a scaling campaign, all you're doing is working really, really hard to make Facebook less and less stable and make it more and more expensive for you as you present yourself as a greater and greater liability to Facebook's bottom line. That's not the way Facebook was designed to be used. And the few people that are winning there, that are doing that at scale, have 2 things in common. One of 2 things in common. Number one, they're running a business that's so successful, they can succeed by running Facebook at a B- strategy. Or 2, their version of success looks like something like ROAS or ad spend, not actual business success. So their version of success isn't an honest one. It's a very selfish and myopic and uninformed one. And you need to understand when you're dealing with people what version of success they're using. Now, I hope that makes sense. And if you love this, please feel free to like and subscribe and ask any more questions on it before we dive into the next thing, because I'm ready to go. Now, what you should be doing to run your creative tests is use Facebook's tool to run creative tests, which is dynamic creative. Now, I hear the feedback on dynamic creative all the time is, well, not every ad gets a fair shot, and all the spend goes to one creative, and they say that that's a problem. Well, the honest truth is that's a good thing. We just established how much of a bad idea it is to invest the majority of your budget on things that are liabilities to your relationship with Facebook. If instead you were able to say, I spent 80% of my budget on the thing that was good, instead of 80% of my budget on things that I ultimately turned off and didn't like, that's a much better relationship. When you work on and managing your investment, and you put the majority of your investment into assets that are desirable, that ultimately produce better business results for you and give you a better relationship with your partner. Those are things that are ultimately good. So if you launch a dynamic creative test and 80% of the spend goes to one thing, that's awesome. That's actually a good thing. You don't need to test everything because spend in Facebook is a meritocracy. Where the spend goes is what ultimately is delivering the end Facebook user a positive experience. Now, our job is ultimately to say what gives the end Facebook user a positive experience and delivers us a projectable and desirable business objective. If we can use a dynamic creative and we run it for a week or 2 weeks and we know, hey, give or take, every day's in and out, but every week I know this is basically going to come in at $40 or so. Great. If our goal is to come in under 50, that's a win. We can honestly look back at week over week trend data and say, I don't care that I'm unstable on a day-to-day basis with this because I know that ultimately the output of this thing is good for me. And if it's not only good, but as good or better than the ads that I'm using in my control environment, hey, I can improve my control environment with extreme confidence. Now we have a system developed that ultimately just makes things better on a consistent basis. This will reduce our costs over time. You should be seeing your CPMs drop year over year. My CPMs this year are less than they were last year, less than they were the year before that. Your cost per acquisition should continue to come down, or they should be stabilized at below your target cost, and you should be able to increase budget because you're making ads that are better and better, that have a higher estimated action rate, so you can spend more money. Because remember, what you pay in the auction, your bid, what they charge you, what Facebook charges you for a conversion is a very simple math equation. It's budget times estimated action rate and advertiser score. Now, when you were running a bunch of ABO testing against every single post ID, you were doing two things. A, you were making a worse estimated action rate for your entire ad account, and you were reducing your advertiser score because you were spending more and more money on things that were a liability to Facebook. So not only was each ad having to struggle on its own with very little spend, also, every loser that you had actually made every winner harder to be successful. So you were creating the system that ultimately worked against yourself. And the only way you can overcome that is by working harder, spending more money, and accepting a worse outcome as acceptable. So one of these is objectively better than the other. And the honest truth is there is no data-based and business result-based argument to say that running ads in an ABO by launching a bunch of tests so that every ad gets the same amount of spend and you can make a qualified impression and decision yourself is better than using dynamic creative. That argument does not exist. And that's a stone cold fact and objective truth that we have to accept. Now, the problem with dynamic creative is there's a lot of options, and people often misuse dynamic creative because they were not taught how to do it properly. So I'm going to teach you that right now. One of the biggest things that I use for dynamic creative is what we call the 3-2-2 method. And what this means is we have 3 of one element, potentially creative, and we have 2 of the other 2. So we might have 3 creatives and 2 headlines and 2 primary text. Now, I hear you saying, well, I've got 20 things that I want to test. Fine, we'll get to that in a minute. But if you have more than 3 of any one of those options, and one thing gets all the spend, and the result is bad, do you know that that concept was bad? Do you know that that ad set was bad? Do you know that that test was a loser? Or was the thing that got all the spend a bad idea? Now, if you have 3, it's really easy because you remove that one thing that got all the spend and performance doesn't improve. Hey, you know objectively, move on to the next one. And if performance is good, hey, you don't have to wait through 10 different creatives to get there. So it makes the decision-making binary, extremely high confidence, and super simple. You can train a machine to do it. A monkey with 30 seconds of coffee and a little bit of a training on how to hit a button can do 90% of the job for you. And that's the kind of thing that you want. A idiot-proof, repeatable system and process to create success at scale with easily repeatable solutions. So the point here is when we use the 3-2-2 method, we are able to understand and work our way through very simple tests. Now, honestly, if you have 3 creatives and 2 headlines and 2 primary texts, which, by the way, we don't test descriptions, we don't test CTAs, those are completely irrelevant and we do not need them. That's 12 total ads, right? That's 12 total possible iterations. Now, honestly, out of those 12 total, you could build them all yourself. You probably won't. When you go into the ad set and build them on in your ABO, you're probably picking and choosing the ones that you think make sense, not letting Facebook pick the one that ultimately gives the end user the best result. Instead of letting Facebook do the work for you, you're working extra hard to guess, and that is never going to work for you. At scale, that is always a losing argument. Now, there are some people that run creative shops that will disagree with that because they build very specific ads for very specific things. And the honest truth is, there is blinders put on when you are going into the situation saying, I'm building creative to look and feel a certain way. And when I get it that certain way, it works better than this. Well, yeah, it'll work better if you don't use dynamic creative testing properly and you don't set it up to be successful. Then you're putting the thumb on the scale to make sure that what you're doing is better. And we see this happen a lot, especially with agencies that make their own creative. That being said, what we can do with the 3-2-2 method is make it extremely easy, binary choice. Is this dynamic creative projectable in its outcome? Yes or no? Is that projectable outcome good? Yes or no? And based on that, we can make some very simple decisions. If it's not projectable, we can decide to either let it continue to run, or we can say, hey, look, it's not projectable, but every outcome of it has been bad. I've run it for 10 days, 14 days, and I don't even know what's going to happen. Well, that is actually a projectable outcome. A lack of confidence and consistency and desirable result. Hey, I know that this test is so chaotic, I don't want to run it anymore. That's fine. Don't do that after 2 or 3 days, though. Let it run for 5, 7, 10, 14 days. Understand with trend analysis, working through a weekend or during the week. Don't launch your ads all on a Sunday and say by Friday, you know what's going to happen, because objectively that is going to set up more and more situations which amplify the problems that you're having. Let the data do the decision making, because Facebook's a machine learning platform that's ultimately designed based on trillions of data points for billions of users and going back over a decade on the vast majority of them, plus seeing every single transaction they've ever taken. Why would you not let that machine that is designed to maintain attention and has proven itself to be the #1 tool in the world at doing that? Why would you try to undermine that and ultimately make a decision yourself based off of incomplete data? Because we already are upset on the reporting that we're having, and ultimately trying to react to things that happened in the past and take guesses on small data sets, because you're spending a little bit of money in a lot of different places when you're running an ABO style test. So when we're running a 3-2-2 method style dynamic creative, ultimately we're able to say, is this projectable? Yes or no? Yes, it's projectable. Great. Is that good or bad? If it's good, great. Then we can go in and extract the post ID of the winning concept, put that with our winners, and move on to the next creative test. We can maybe be running 2 creative tests at once alongside winners, or in this case, a proving ground style campaign where all of our best post IDs are. This is actually the foundation of how I build ad accounts that run off of one campaign that can spend easily $1 million a year. I have some that are spending over $1 million a month that are not more complicated than this, because ultimately, we are investing the vast majority of our resources into content that Facebook wants to see. And we are then saying, this is what you want to see. Is this good for me too? The answer is yes. Great. We're going to move forward with it. If the answer is no, great. We're going to move on. And we're going to continue to do this so that I'm continually producing more and more high confidence, high value assets that I can invest more and more into, because not only am I meeting Facebook's business objectives, because ultimately that's what we have to do here, but we also need to make sure that Facebook's business objective meets our own. So when we create content, we're not fighting the machine, but instead working with it. Now we're in a situation where we are going to be tremendously more successful, and on the back of way less work. Now, how do we get the post ID from that winning ad? Well, it's really easy. Now, one of the biggest complaints I hear about dynamic creative is, well, I don't know all the posts. I can't see the performance. I break down by dynamic element, and I have no information. That's objectively wrong. You can see the spend by element. Great. What's getting 80% of the spend? If the outcome is good, that is the reason the outcome is good. If the outcome is bad, that is the reason the outcome is bad. Or if 2 things are getting 50-50, great. We can use that information when we ultimately look to the preview Facebook post with comments, because that's where we're going to find the post ID of all of the ads that we're running. So when we can hit share in the upper right-hand corner, and we hit share, and then it drops down to Facebook posts with comments, we can go there and you're gonna see this ugly URL across the top. It says DCO this, question mark that, great. But you're gonna see in order the ads in the order that they have of estimated action rate, what ads are most desirable for Facebook's bottom line. We can see those ads, what headlines they have, what creatives they have, what primary text they have, and we can then reference back to the spend that we had by dynamic creative element and say, wow, this one has the creative that spent the most, the headline that spent the most, and the primary text was about 50-50. Great, that's an ad that we know is probably responsible for a lot of the outcome of that test. And if we like the outcome of that test, why not take the thing that probably spent the most, that is the highest contributor to that good success, that's probably doing a lot better than the average? Because remember, there are a few bad ideas in there that are keeping that average higher than it should be when we're talking about efficiency. And we can hit the timestamp on that ad where it says created by you on so-and-so date. And when you hit that timestamp, you're gonna notice the URL changes. And now you're gonna get the post IDs, all of the letters and numbers that come in after the last little slash that we have at the end of that URL. Now, when we look there, we can take that, we can make an ad, we say use existing post, we copy, paste it in there, boom. Now we're promoting the post that's the winner of the dynamic creative test, and we can move right along. Now, you can repeat this process once a week. I don't think you should put it on a timeline, though. Put it on the element of, do I have confidence in the outcome of this test? Do I objectively know where this will end? And if the answer is yes, fantastic. And if it's good and yes, take that post ID, put it alongside your other winning ideas, and then ultimately you've got a system for repeatable success that is only making every ad that you are ultimately spending the majority of your budget on better and better. Now, if you use this inside of a CBO campaign at broad, which is what you should be doing, now your winners are competing for spend against your tests, which means your tests have to not only win in the test, but they have to compete against the winners. Now, I've gone into extreme length before about why running a test campaign and a scaling campaign is a terrible idea, because it completely breaks up the scientific method, and there people are successful at that. But again, that's because their business is so good they can do a bad job at Facebook, or their definition of success isn't actually a business objective one, but instead a misinformed, myopic one. When you're running your test and it has to compete with existing winners, and it wins, your confidence is extremely high. And we want to make sure that we have extremely high confidence so that we can invest in super high value assets, so that we can continue to make every choice that Facebook does on our behalf better and better. And that's the real choice, because we are the manager, they are the employee. We have to give the system higher value assets to make decisions on our behalf. Now, if you like this, please, again, hit subscribe, like, comment if you have any questions. Let's dive into the last bit here. If we are running our ads and Facebook is a machine learning platform, what are we teaching it and how does it work? Well, the honest truth is Facebook is a machine learning platform, which means that what we invest, every impression, every penny, euro, rand that we spend, ultimately is giving the system data. And that data is what makes all of the decisions for us. Facebook looks at what's happened and then tries to find other ways of repeating that or making it better for the end user. And that's the biggest thing here. Facebook isn't aligned against you. And that's what I hear a lot of time. People say, well, it just feels like the machine doesn't want me to win. And that's 100% objectively false. But when you're not aligning yourself towards the success of the machine, don't be surprised when it doesn't work well for you. And if you give an employee a bad set of instructions and you tell it to make really bad choices and your business fails, don't be mad at the employee for something that is squarely your fault. So that being said, the data that we get is extremely valuable. So when we run creative testing with a lot of post IDs and a lot of different ads and a lot of different ad sets at very low budgets, we have to remember our level of confidence in the outcome of any of those tests is extremely negligible. If you are spending 20 bucks, 50 bucks against 4, 5, 10 different post IDs, and you're hoping to make sure that each one gets a decent amount of chance of where we're going to spend, great. Here's the problem. None of those things are actually getting enough budget for you to understand whether the success they had was luck or merited and repeatable. Now, you might be saying, well, I've been doing this for a long time and that's the way it works. Great. you've been doing a C+ or B- job for a long time, and maybe that you were successful with that. But imagine what it would look like if you were doing it properly and you were able to scale your business with confidence and success with stable and projectable outcomes on less and less work. Now, before we talked about if you had 20 creatives that you wanted to run. Now, if you have 20 creatives and we're using that 3-2-2 method talked about earlier, and you are having trouble because you only run 3 instead of 20, you can run 3 of them and then launch the next test of the next 3, and then the next 3. And what you're doing is instead of spending across 20 ideas at once, you're spending across a couple of ideas at a time. And you're making sure that only the best ideas of those little batches get all of the spend. So you're spending the majority of your money giving Facebook the highest quality data in a very high volume to let you understand whether or not you're meeting the business needs of Facebook, and if when you do meet their business needs, if that's good for you. Which ultimately brings us down to the very last thing here. Ads do the targeting. This is not up for debate. This is objectively true. Every ad is actually a post ID. That post ID is actually a web page. Facebook is measuring the click-through rate, the bounce rate, the stickiness, everything on every web page. And they're ultimately measuring for CRO. They're ultimately measuring for time on site. They're trying to make sure that any user that sees this content is more likely to come back to the page or spend longer on-site the platform, in the app, or on the site. And what that means is when somebody comes to your web page and they do well and they give a response that Facebook deems is valuable, let's say you get 1,000 of them and 500 responded positively and 500 responded poorly. Who do you think is going to see that next 1,000 impressions? Facebook is going to say, well, these 500 people responded well. I'm going to find 500 or 1,000 people that more look like that look like those people, that behave like those people. Because the ad, just like our organic content, is creating its own audience. Every ad makes its own lookalike audience of people that respond positively to it. Now, when you use a targeting audience, a lookalike or an interest group or something like that, what you're doing is saying, I want you to force my ads onto this audience. And you're saying, regardless of who actually wants to see it, regardless of where this ad might actually be delivering a good result, regardless of where I'm going to actually be a good business partner to Facebook and I'm going to get projectable and desirable and scalable outcomes with high confidence, I want you instead to go focus your ads on this spot. And I'm going to pay more money to do that, which ultimately, again, makes your advertiser score worse because the majority of that budget is going towards people that probably don't want to see your ad. What is the overlap of the ad's own lookalike audience and the audience that you've chosen? What happens when you place 3 or 4 of those ads inside of one ad set? Now there's a Venn diagram of where all of those ads want to go. And what is the overlap of that and the audience that you've picked? Is that audience large enough for you to scale? And what I hear most often, people say, well, my lookalike is doing them my broad, so I'm just going to run a lookalike. Yeah, it will, because it's only a small section. And when you use it in tandem with broad, that's great. But remember, what you're doing is you're ultimately saying, here's an existing set of data, and I want to only focus my ads on the people who, based on existing sets of data, are likely to respond well, regardless of who my ads are actually being wanted to shown to. And what you're doing is when you run that alongside broad, and then you say, well, lookalikes outperform. What you're doing is you're saying, when I cherry pick my result to get a short win today, while making my advertising costs long-term less desirable, and I'm reducing my advertiser score, and I'm hurting the estimated action rate of every single ad by forcing experiences onto people that they don't want to have, and I'm impeding Facebook's ability to deliver people positive experiences because I'm not interested in being a good business partner, ultimately, success gets more and more difficult. And yes, that means broad won't be as efficient as the lookalike because you're investing more and more money into ultimately cannibalizing the success that you deserve. But if you turned off the retargeting, if you turned off the lookalikes, if you ran creative testing with dynamic creative at broad and only escalated the ads that won, you wouldn't need that lookalike anymore. Because remember, the ads have a lookalike audience. Every ad makes its own audience. And if you scale against only the audience that the ads actually want to appeal to, and you're constantly making better ads, that ultimately give you a better desired outcome that's stable and projectable, you can scale your business with extreme confidence, much lower workload, so that you see more success and less stress. Ultimately, that's how you're supposed to do creative testing. At the end of the day, there are a million ways of doing the job, and you can succeed doing the job wrong. But there is an objective truth in how the machine works. There are objective facts, inarguable, on tools designed to help you be better aligned with Facebook. It's your choice whether or not you want to reject how the machine works, to disrespect the end user and work much harder and then struggle, or if you want to give up a losing battle that ultimately you will lose, and in favor, line yourself up with how the system actually works so that you can be more and more successful moving forward. And that's really the choice that you have. Would you rather do things wrong, but it means you have to work harder and harder, and maybe you can get away with it because your business is so good, or your definition of success isn't actually growth in the business? Or would you say, I don't care what it used to look like, I'm willing to do better and better, scale the growth of my business, the growth of my client, while making myself have to work less and less and give myself greater and greater confidence, and eliminate all of this noise and instability and lack of consistency in my advertising? That's a choice you can make. But ultimately, if you want to do creative testing on Facebook and you're not doing dynamic creative against broad, you are setting yourself up for failure. That is, again, an objective truth, backed by every single data point that we've talked about, and backed up by the engineering and product team. And believe me, I know, I was there at the development of a lot of these tools, and I spent hundreds of millions of dollars trying to prove one way or the other as being right. And every single time that you lean into the machine, you're going to be more successful than trying to cheat it and work harder and harder. You have the choice. Do you want to work and do a good job and ultimately make the outcome of your work better and better so that it's easier and easier to be more and more successful? Or do you want to be right and be smart and ultimately go out of business? Facebook is fun. YouTube is great. They think you might like some of these. Don't forget to subscribe. And if you have any questions or opinions about this, please don't be shy. Ask them below. Hit subscribe. Go to links.facebookdisruptor.com for more resources. You deserve success. I'm glad to be helpful. Until next time, I'll see you on the internet.